The sun was setting over the quiet suburban neighborhood, casting long shadows across the sidewalks and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Margaret, an elderly woman with silver hair neatly tied into a bun, walked slowly down the street. Her hands were full, clutching both the handles of her grocery cart and a small purse slung over her shoulder. She had just finished shopping for the week at the local supermarket, filling her cart with essentials like bread, milk, canned goods, and fresh vegetables. Though she moved at a slower pace these days, there was still a sense of purpose in her steps. Margaret had lived in this neighborhood for decades. It was a place where everyone knew each other, or at least that's how it used to be. Lately, however, things felt different. The friendly faces she once recognized seemed fewer and farther between. New families had moved in, bringing with them unfamiliar routines and attitudes. Some parts of the community now felt distant, almost alien. Still, Margaret didn't let those changes bother her too much. She believed in minding her own business while staying kind to others. That philosophy had served her well throughout her life. As she turned onto a quieter side street, lined with modest houses and trimmed hedges, Margaret noticed 3 teenagers leaning against a lamppost near the corner. They were dressed in baggy clothes, their hoodies pulled up despite the mild evening air. One of them was tossing a crumpled soda can into the air and catching it lazily, while another scrolled through his phone without much interest. The third, teen, clearly the leader of the group, nudged his friends and pointed toward Margaret as she approached. At first, Margaret didn't think anything of it. Teenagers often gathered around the area after school, chatting or goofing off before heading home. But something about the way they looked at her made her uneasy. Their eyes followed her every move, and their whispers grew louder as she drew closer. Margaret tried to ignore them, focusing instead on navigating the uneven pavement with her heavy cart. She adjusted her grip on the handlebars and kept walking, hoping they would lose interest soon. But they didn't. As Margaret passed by, one of the teens called out, "Hey, Grandma, what's in the bag, cookies?" His tone wasn't playful. It was mocking. Margaret stopped for a moment, turning her head slightly to glance at them. Her expression remained calm, but inside she felt a flicker of irritation. She wasn't someone who liked being teased, especially not by people half her age. "Just groceries," she replied evenly, her voice steady despite the tension creeping into her chest. The comment seemed to amuse the group. The leader smirked and stepped forward, closing the gap between them. "Groceries, huh? Bet you got some good stuff in there." He gestured toward her cart, his posture relaxed but deliberately intimidating. His 2 friends chuckled nervously, clearly egging him on. Margaret tightened her hold on the cart, her knuckles whitening slightly. She could feel her heart beating faster, though she refused to show any sign of fear. Instead, she straightened her back and met his gaze directly. "If you're looking for snacks, I suggest checking the store," she said coolly. "This is mine." For a brief moment, the teenager hesitated. There was something about Margaret's unwavering stare that caught him off guard. Maybe it was the sharpness in her eyes or the firmness in her voice. Whatever it was, it gave her a fleeting advantage. But then his pride kicked in and he laughed loudly, trying to cover up his momentary uncertainty. "Oh, come on, Grandma," he sneered. "We're just messing with you. Lighten up." His friends joined in, their laughter echoing down the empty street. Margaret took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay composed. She had dealt with difficult people before, far worse than a couple of rowdy kids, and she wasn't about to let them ruin her evening. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this situation might escalate if she didn't handle it carefully. She glanced around, hoping to spot someone nearby who might intervene. Unfortunately, the street was deserted. Most residents were either indoors preparing dinner or busy with their own lives. No one seemed to notice what was happening. The leader of the group took another step closer, his smirk widening. "You know, we could help you carry those bags," he said, reaching out as if to grab the handle of her cart. Margaret instinctively pulled it away, her movements quick despite her age. "I don't need your help," she shot back, her voice sharper this time. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd leave me alone." Her words hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. For a second, the teenagers exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Then the leader shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Fine, whatever. You're no fun anyway," he muttered, taking a step back. Just as Margaret thought the confrontation might end there, one of the other teens decided to push further. He darted forward suddenly, attempting to snatch her purse from her shoulder. Margaret reacted instantly, gripping the strap tightly and pulling it back with surprising strength. "Don't even think about it," she warned, her voice low and commanding. The teen stumbled backward, caught off guard by her resistance. His friends burst into laughter again, though it sounded forced this time. Clearly, they hadn't expected Margaret to fight back. Despite her resolve, Margaret couldn't deny the growing unease in her stomach. These teenagers weren't just harmless pranksters. They were bullies testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push someone before backing down. And while Margaret prided herself on her resilience, she also knew when to recognize danger. If this continued, she feared it might spiral out of control. Just as she braced herself for whatever came next, a new voice broke through the chaos. From across the street, a man emerged, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was tall and muscular, with a confident stride that demanded respect. His casual attire, a plain black t-shirt and jeans, did little to hide the fact that he was someone who exuded authority. As he approached, the teenagers froze, their bravado vanishing in an instant. Margaret turned her head to see who had arrived, relief washing over her features. Whoever this stranger was, his timing couldn't have been better. Margaret's grip on her purse loosened slightly as she turned to face the newcomer, her eyes widening in surprise. The man approaching was unlike anyone she had expected to see in this quiet neighborhood. His broad shoulders and muscular build were unmistakable, but it wasn't just his physical presence that caught her attention. It was the calm, commanding aura he carried with him. He walked with purpose, each step deliberate and measured, as if he owned the street itself. The teenagers, who moments ago had been laughing and taunting, now looked uneasy, their confidence wavering under his steady gaze. The man stopped a few feet away from the group, his dark eyes scanning the scene with an intensity that made even Margaret feel a little self-conscious. For a moment, no one spoke. The air seemed heavier, charged with anticipation. Finally, the man broke the silence. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a knife. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but there was an undeniable authority behind it that demanded an answer. The leader of the teens, still clutching the crumpled soda can, tried to muster some bravado. "Nah, man, we're just hanging out," he said, forcing a grin. But his words lacked conviction, and his hands twitched nervously at his sides. His two friends shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other as if silently debating whether to run or stay. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took another step forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over the group. When he finally spoke again, his tone was calm but firm. "Looks like you're bothering this lady. Is that true?" Margaret felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't used to having someone stand up for her, especially not someone who seemed so formidable. Part of her wanted to step in and explain what had happened, but another part, the wiser, more cautious part, told her to let the man handle it. After all, he clearly knew how to command respect. Still, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride at the way he had intervened. It was rare to find someone willing to step into a situation like this without hesitation. The leader of the teens stammered, his earlier cockiness crumbling under the weight of the man's stare. "We weren't bothering her," he protested, weakly though his voice betrayed his nerves. "She's just being dramatic." His friends nodded quickly in agreement, eager to back him up but unable to meet the man's eyes. The stranger raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Dramatic, huh?" he repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Because from where? I'm standing, it looks like you were trying to take something that doesn't belong to you." At those words, the teenager's face flushed red. Whether it was embarrassment or anger, Margaret couldn't tell, but she noticed the way his jaw tightened and his fists clenched at his sides. For a split second, she worried that he might lash out, but the man's imposing figure kept him rooted in place. Sensing the shift in dynamics, the stranger crossed his arms over his chest and leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You know, I've seen plenty of people try to act tough when they think no one's watching, but trust me, it never ends well. For anyone. The teenagers exchanged panicked glances, their bravado completely gone now. The leader muttered something under his breath, too low for anyone to hear before taking a hesitant step backward. His friends followed suit, their movements awkward and hurried. Whatever, man, the leader mumbled, stuffing the crumpled soda can into his pocket. We were just messing around, no big deal. Without waiting for a response, the trio turned and bolted down the street, their footsteps echoing loudly as they disappeared around the corner. For a moment, Margaret simply stood there, staring after them in stunned silence. Her heart was still racing, though the immediate danger had passed. She turned to look at the man who had come to her rescue, her expression a mix of gratitude and curiosity. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." The man smiled warmly, his stern demeanor softening instantly. "Don't mention it," he replied. "I couldn't just stand by and watch." As he helped her steady her grocery cart, Margaret studied him more closely. There was something familiar about his face, though she couldn't quite place it. His features were sharp and defined, his skin tanned from years spent outdoors. His dark hair was cropped short, and his piercing eyes seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was a kindness in his expression that put her at ease. "Are you new around here?" she asked cautiously, unsure if she should pry. The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Not exactly. I'm visiting a friend who lives nearby. Just happened to be passing through when I saw what was going on." He paused, glancing down the street where the teenagers had fled. Kids these days. Sometimes they forget that actions have consequences. Margaret nodded in agreement, though she couldn't help but wonder what kind of life experiences had shaped this man's perspective. There was a wisdom in his words that suggested he had seen more than his share of trouble. "Still," he continued, turning his attention back to her, "you handled yourself pretty well back there. Not many people would stand up to a group like that, especially alone." Margaret blushed at the compliment, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, it's nothing. I've dealt with worse in my time," she said with a small laugh. "But I'll admit I'm glad you came along when you did." The man grinned, clearly amused by her modesty. "Well, I'm just glad I could help. Are you okay? Do you need a hand getting home?" Margaret hesitated, torn between accepting his offer and insisting she was fine. On one hand, she didn't want to inconvenience him. On the other, the thought of carrying her groceries alone after such a stressful encounter didn't appeal to her. "If it's not too much trouble," she said finally, her tone polite but reserved. "My house is just a few blocks away." The man nodded, picking up one of her heavier bags without waiting for further protest. "Lead the way," he said, gesturing for her to go ahead. As they began walking, Margaret found herself stealing glances at her companion, trying to piece together who he was. There was something oddly familiar about him, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Was he a local, celebrity, a retired athlete, or maybe just someone who liked to keep to himself? Whatever the case, she decided it wouldn't hurt to ask. "Forgive me for saying so," she began hesitantly, "but you seem different from most people around here. Have we met before?" The man laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I get that a lot," he admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "But no, I don't think we've met. Like I said, I'm just visiting." He paused, tilting his head slightly as if considering whether to say more. "Though if you watch movies, you might recognize me. My name's Vin Diesel." Margaret stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Vin Diesel? As in, the actor?" she exclaimed, her voice rising in excitement. "Oh my goodness, I thought you looked familiar." Vin chuckled, clearly used to this reaction. "Guilty as charged," he said with a wink. "But please, don't make a fuss. I'm just a regular guy trying to enjoy some downtime." Despite his insistence, Margaret couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration. Here was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, casually walking her home after saving her from a potentially dangerous situation. It was surreal, to say the least. "Well, Mr. Diesel," she said, regaining her composure, "I must say, you certainly know how to make an impression. Thank you again, for everything." Vin smiled, his expression softening. "Call me Vin," he corrected gently. "And it's my pleasure, really. Besides, it's not every day I get to play the hero in real life." They shared a laugh, the tension of the earlier encounter melting away as they continued toward Margaret's house. By the time they reached her front door, she felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Little did she know, this chance meeting was only the beginning of an unexpected friendship that would leave a lasting impact on both their lives. The next morning, Margaret woke up with a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in years. As she sipped her tea and nibbled on a slice of toast, her mind kept drifting back to the events of the previous evening. The confrontation with the teenagers had been unsettling, but Vin Diesel's unexpected intervention had turned everything around. She couldn't help but smile at the memory of his calm yet commanding presence. What were the odds that a Hollywood star would stroll into her quiet neighborhood just when she needed him most? It was almost like something out of a movie, ironic considering who he was. After finishing her breakfast, Margaret decided to tidy up her living room. Her home wasn't large or extravagant, but it was cozy and filled with reminders of her life, framed photographs of family members, shelves lined with books she'd collected over decades, and handmade crafts from friends who had long since moved away. As she dusted off a photo of herself as a young woman standing beside her late husband, she paused for a moment, lost in thought. Life had changed so much since those days, but moments like last night reminded her that kindness and courage still existed in the world, if you knew where to look. Just as she placed the picture back on the shelf, there was a knock at the door. Margaret frowned slightly, wondering who could be visiting her this early. She wasn't expecting anyone, and her neighbors rarely stopped by unannounced. Curious, she made her way to the front door and peeked through the peephole. To her astonishment, she saw Vin Diesel standing on her porch, holding a small potted plant wrapped in colorful paper. Margaret hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should open the door. Was this really happening? Had Vin Diesel come to check on her again? Shaking off her disbelief, she unlocked the door and swung it open, greeting him with a mix of surprise and delight. "Vin, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and gratitude. Vin grinned, holding up the plant. "I wanted to make sure you were okay after yesterday," he said simply, stepping inside when she gestured for him to come in. "And I figured you might appreciate a little greenery. Plants always brighten up a space, don't they?" Margaret laughed softly, taking the plant from him and admiring its glossy leaves. "That's very thoughtful of you," she said warmly. "Thank you. Please have a seat." She led him to the living room, setting the plant down on the coffee table before heading to the kitchen to prepare some tea. While the kettle boiled, she glanced back at Vin, who was looking around the room with genuine interest. His eyes lingered on the photographs and knickknacks, absorbing the details of her life. When she returned with 2 steaming cups of tea, he smiled gratefully. "This is a lovely home you have," he said, accepting the cup. "It feels lived in, like it has stories to tell." Margaret nodded, settling into her favorite armchair across from him. "It does," she agreed. "Every corner holds a memory, good or bad, but mostly good, thank goodness." She took a sip of her tea, studying him over the rim of her cup. "So, what brings you here today? I imagine you're a busy man." Vin leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "To be honest, I couldn't stop thinking about our meeting last night," he admitted. "You handled yourself so well against those kids. Most people wouldn't have stood their ground like that. I was impressed." Margaret chuckled, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, I'm no hero. I've just learned to speak my mind when necessary. Besides, I had backup this time, didn't I?" Her comment made Vin laugh, the sound filling the room with warmth. "Backup, huh? Well, I'm glad. I could lend a hand, but seriously, Margaret, you're remarkable. Not many people your age, or any age for that matter, would face down bullies like that. You've got guts." Margaret blushed at the compliment, though she appreciated the sincerity behind his words. Well, I suppose I've always believed in standing up for myself, she said. Life hasn't always been easy, but I've tried to stay strong through it all. And sometimes you meet people along the way who remind you why that matters. She gave him a pointed look, and Vin smiled, understanding the sentiment. As they continued talking, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Vin shared anecdotes from his travels and experiences in the film industry, while Margaret recounted stories from her own life. Her childhood growing up in a small town, her adventures traveling with her husband, and the joys and challenges of raising her children. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, they found common ground in their love for storytelling. Margaret revealed that she used to write short stories in her younger years, though she hadn't done so in quite some time. That's amazing, Vin said, his eyes lighting up. Do you still have any of them? I'd love to read them sometime. Margaret hesitated, glancing toward a cabinet in the corner of the room. Some of them are tucked away in boxes, she admitted. But they're probably outdated now. Writing styles change, you know. Vin shook his head firmly. Stories never go out of style, he countered, especially ones written from the heart. Maybe we can dig them out later. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, each story leading to another. Margaret found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, sharing memories she hadn't revisited in years. In turn, Vin listened intently, asking questions and offering insights that showed he truly cared. For someone who spent much of his life in the public eye, he had a rare ability to connect with others on a personal level. By the time the afternoon sun began streaming through the windows, Margaret realized how much time had passed. Goodness, I didn't realize it was getting so late, she said, rising from her chair to stretch. Would you like to stay for lunch? I can whip something up quickly. Vin smiled, shaking his head. I'd love to, but I don't want to impose. Plus, I promised my friend I'd meet them soon. But I'll definitely come back another time if you'll have me. Margaret nodded enthusiastically. Of course. You're always welcome here, Vin. This has been such a pleasant surprise. They exchanged warm smiles before walking to the door together. As Vin stepped outside, he turned back to her one last time. Take care of yourself, Margaret, he said sincerely, and keep writing those stories. The world needs more voices like yours. With that, he waved goodbye and headed down the path, leaving Margaret standing on the porch with a wide grin on her face. Watching him disappear around the corner, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Perhaps it was time to dust off those old notebooks and see what new stories she could create. After all, life had a funny way of reminding us that even the smallest moments could lead to something extraordinary. Over the next few weeks, Vin Diesel became a regular visitor to Margaret's home. Their initial meeting had sparked an unlikely friendship, one that neither of them had anticipated, but both cherished deeply. Every time Vin stopped by, he brought something small yet meaningful. A fresh loaf of bread from the bakery, a bouquet of wildflowers, or even a DVD of one of his movies with a handwritten note on the cover. For my favorite storyteller. Margaret would always laugh at his gestures, touched by the thoughtfulness behind them. Their conversations grew richer with each visit. They discovered they had more in common than they initially realized. Both loved books, particularly ones that explored human resilience and courage. Margaret introduced Vin to some of her favorite authors, classic writers like Harper Lee and modern voices like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, while Vin recommended novels and biographies he'd found inspiring during his travels. He also encouraged her to revisit her own writing, reminding her how powerful personal stories could be. You've lived through so much, he told her one afternoon as they sat sipping tea in her garden. Your experiences deserve to be shared. Margaret hesitated at first, unsure if she still had it in her to write after all these years. But Vin's encouragement was infectious. One day, she finally dug out the old shoebox tucked away in her closet, filled with yellowed pages of short stories and poems she'd written decades ago. As she flipped through the faded sheets, memories came flooding back. The late nights spent scribbling by candlelight, the joy of crafting worlds with words, and the pride she felt when her husband praised her work. She showed some of the pieces to Vin, who read them with genuine admiration. "These are incredible," he said, his voice full of awe. "You have such a gift for capturing emotions. These aren't just stories, they're windows into life itself." Margaret blushed at the compliment, brushing off his praise with a modest wave of her hand. "They're just little things I wrote to pass the time," she said. "Nothing special." But Vin wouldn't hear it. "Don't sell yourself short," he insisted. "People need to hear these stories. Maybe we can find a way to share them." Inspired by his enthusiasm, Margaret decided to give writing another try. With Vin's support, she began working on new material, drawing inspiration from her past and present. She wrote about her childhood adventures, her struggles as a young mother, and even the recent encounter with the teenagers that had brought Vin into her life. Writing became a form of therapy for her, a way to process her thoughts and reflect on her journey. And every time Vin visited, he eagerly asked to see what she'd been working on. One sunny Saturday morning, Vin arrived at Margaret's house with an idea that caught her completely off guard. "What if we turned your stories into a film?" he suggested casually, as though proposing a walk in the park. Margaret nearly dropped her teacup. "A film? About my life?" she exclaimed, laughing nervously. "Vin, I'm flattered, but I don't think anyone would want to watch that." Vin leaned forward, his expression serious. "That's where you're wrong," he said firmly. "Your stories are universal. They speak to themes everyone can relate to: love, loss, resilience, hope. People crave authenticity, and your voice is exactly what the world needs right now." He went on to explain how he envisioned the project: a heartfelt drama that combined elements of documentary and fiction, blending Margaret's real-life experiences with cinematic storytelling. At first, Margaret dismissed the idea as too far-fetched. She was just an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. Why would anyone care about her story? But Vin wouldn't let her doubts deter him. Over the course of several visits, he patiently addressed each of her concerns, explaining how films were made and assuring her that her perspective was valuable. He even promised to involve her in every step of the process, ensuring she retained creative control. Slowly but surely, Margaret began to warm up to the idea. To help her visualize the concept, Vin invited her to join him on set for one of his upcoming projects. It was a family-friendly action movie being filmed in a nearby city, and he thought it might give her insight into how movies were brought to life. At first, Margaret was hesitant. She wasn't used to bustling environments or being surrounded by cameras and crew members. But Vin assured her that she could observe quietly from the sidelines. Reluctantly, she agreed. The experience turned out to be eye-opening. From the moment they arrived on set, Margaret was amazed by the organized chaos of filmmaking. Actors rehearsed their lines, directors shouted instructions, and technicians adjusted lighting equipment, all while Vin navigated the scene with ease, slipping seamlessly into character whenever the cameras rolled. Between takes, he introduced her to the cast and crew, explaining their roles and answering her endless questions. Everyone treated her with kindness and respect, making her feel like part of the team. During a break, Vin took her aside and asked for her thoughts. "It's incredible," she admitted, shaking her head in amazement. "I never imagined so much work went into making a single scene. It's like watching magic happen." Vin smiled, pleased with her reaction. "And imagine if your story was the one we were telling," he said. "Can you picture it? Your words coming to life on screen, reaching people all over the world." The idea lingered in Margaret's mind long after they left the set. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream about the possibility. What if her stories could inspire others? What if her experiences could connect with people facing similar challenges? The more she thought about it, the more excited she became. That evening, as she sat at her kitchen table jotting down notes for a new story, she realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sharing a piece of herself with the world, and maybe in doing so helping others find strength in their own lives. When Vin returned the following week, Margaret greeted him with a smile that said everything before she even spoke. "All right," she said, folding her arms playfully. "Let's do it. Let's make this movie." Vin's face lit up with excitement. "Are you sure?" he asked, wanting to confirm she was ready. Margaret nodded confidently. "Absolutely. But only if you promise to stick around and help me through it. This whole thing is still pretty overwhelming." "Deal," Vin replied, extending his hand for a handshake. Margaret laughed and swatted it away, pulling him into a hug instead. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for believing in me, for seeing something in me that I didn't see myself." Vin hugged her back, his embrace warm and reassuring. "The credit goes to you, Margaret," he said, softly. "You're the one with the stories worth telling." As they sat together planning the next steps, Margaret felt a surge of gratitude, not just for Vin, but for the unexpected turn her life had taken. A chance encounter with a group of bullies had led her to rediscover her passion for writing and forge a friendship she never could have imagined. Now, with Vin's guidance and support, she was stepping into uncharted territory, ready to share her voice with the world. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of an extraordinary chapter in her life, one that would touch countless hearts and remind everyone that even the simplest stories hold the power to change lives. Months passed, and Margaret's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. What started as a simple idea, a film based on her stories, began to take shape with Vin Diesel's unwavering dedication and vision. The project quickly gained momentum, attracting attention from producers, screenwriters, and filmmakers who were captivated by Margaret's unique perspective. It wasn't just the content of her stories that drew people in, it was the authenticity behind them, the raw honesty that resonated deeply with everyone involved. Vin took charge of overseeing the production, ensuring that Margaret remained at the heart of the process. He organized brainstorming sessions where they discussed which stories to include, how best to adapt them for the screen, and what message they wanted the film to convey. Margaret, though initially intimidated by the scale of the project, found herself thriving in this collaborative environment. She shared anecdotes about her childhood, her marriage, and her journey through grief after losing her husband, while Vin listened intently, offering suggestions that preserved the essence of her voice. One of the most memorable moments came during casting. Vin insisted that Margaret be present for auditions, believing her input was crucial to finding actors who could truly embody her characters. At first, Margaret felt out of place sitting alongside seasoned professionals in a dimly lit studio, but soon she realized her instincts were invaluable. When a young actress auditioned for the role of Margaret as a teenager, delivering a heartfelt monologue about dreams and determination, Margaret's eyes welled up with tears. "That's exactly how I felt back then," she whispered to Vin, who grinned knowingly. "See, you're already shaping this film." As pre-production wrapped up and filming began, Margaret spent more time on set than she ever anticipated. Vin made sure she had a comfortable chair near the director's monitor, often inviting her to watch scenes unfold. Between takes, he would explain technical aspects like camera angles and lighting, patiently answering her questions. Occasionally, he'd ask for her opinion on a line delivery or scene transition, valuing her insight above all else. To Margaret, it felt surreal yet profoundly fulfilling to see fragments of her life recreated before her eyes. The cast and crew grew fond of Margaret, affectionately referring to her as the soul of the movie. Her presence brought warmth and inspiration to the set, reminding everyone why they were there. Actors approached her during breaks, eager to learn more about the real-life experiences that inspired their roles. One day, the lead actress playing adult Margaret sat beside her during lunch, asking shyly, "How did you stay so strong through everything?" Margaret smiled, placing a gentle hand on the woman's arm. "Strength isn't something you're born with," she replied. "It's something you find when you need it most." Filming wrapped several months later, leaving Margaret both exhausted and exhilarated. Watching the final cut of the film for the first time was an emotional experience. As the opening credits rolled, accompanied by a soft piano melody, she clasped Vin's hand tightly, her breath catching in her throat. The screen flickered to life, showing images of her younger self running barefoot through fields, laughing under starlit skies, and facing challenges with quiet resilience. Each frame felt like stepping into a cherished memory, vivid and alive. When the lights came back on, Margaret turned to Vin, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice trembling. Vin smiled, his own eyes glistening. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "This is your story, Margaret. Your legacy." The film premiered at a prestigious international festival, drawing critical acclaim and touching audiences worldwide. Critics praised its heartfelt storytelling and universal themes, hailing it as a celebration of human spirit and perseverance. For Margaret, however, the true reward came from the letters and messages she received from viewers. People wrote to thank her for sharing her journey, saying her words had given them hope during dark times. A mother battling illness told her, the film reminded her to cherish every moment. A young man struggling with self-doubt said her courage inspired him to pursue his dreams. These responses filled Margaret with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Vin stayed by her side throughout the whirlwind of publicity tours, interviews, and award ceremonies. Together, they attended glamorous events, mingling with celebrities and dignitaries, yet always staying grounded in their shared mission to spread kindness and connection through storytelling. Their friendship deepened over time, evolving into a bond built on mutual respect and admiration. Margaret often joked that she'd gone from being a quiet retiree to having a Hollywood star as her best friend, while Vin teased her about becoming a reluctant celebrity. Back home, life returned to its familiar rhythm but with a newfound richness. Margaret continued writing, encouraged by Vin to keep exploring new ideas. She even started teaching creative writing workshops at the local community center, sharing her love for storytelling with others. Vin visited whenever his schedule allowed, often surprising her with spontaneous trips or thoughtful gifts. On one occasion, he arrived with tickets to a Broadway show, whisking her away for a weekend in New York City. "Consider it a thank you," he said with a wink, "for changing my life as much as I've changed yours." Margaret laughed, knowing he meant it. Their chance meeting had blossomed into something extraordinary, proving that kindness and courage could bridge even the unlikeliest connections. Through laughter, tears, and countless cups of tea, they had created something timeless, a testament to the power of stories to heal, inspire, and unite. As Margaret sat on her porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From standing up to bullies on a quiet street to seeing her life immortalized on the big screen, she had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, and a friend who believed in her when she doubted herself. Life, she realized, was full of surprises, and sometimes those surprises turned out to be blessings in disguise.